having said that, communications can do a lot for us, particularly with safety. And we're lucky to live in the time we do. We have things like this and things like EPIRBs and personal locator beacons that make what we do a little bit more approachable for a lot of users, because it gives you a margin of error and the ability to often, I don't know how often a radio or a personal locator beacon actually saves somebody, but it sure makes for a lot easier of a time when you get stuck somewhere and you don't have to spend a week trying to figure out how to get out of some, place in the Northwest, and you have access to these technologies. It's also certainly not a sales pitch. I've talked to this organization a couple of times, great group of people. Other times I did it was at the Lucky Lab Brewery, and a little more. There was pizza then, which I don't have any pizza now, but it's not a sales pitch. Don't feel like you have to get out and buy all these things. They're neat enhancements to what you do, but they're certainly not necessary. And at the same time, don't feel like owning a $300 solution piece of technology is what makes you safe. It's not. It's what makes us safe when we're on the water is our approach to being on the water. We talk a lot about the flow plan, both in recreational and commercial and professional mariners talk about this a lot. And having a plan and having people know where you are and know why you're out there and where you're going to be is really what it comes down to. Things like radios, the VHF radio is one of the more common accessories that kayakers like to add on. And it's a great accessory, and it has some real limitations. It's not certainly not a piece of equipment you strap to yourself and do things you wouldn't do otherwise. It's not a perfect solution. You have to have a plan for how to use it. You have to know somebody's listening. You have to be reaching out at the time that they're listening. So there's a lot of limitations to that. It's a good piece of equipment to have. It's a good piece of equipment for groups to use. Locator beacons and satellite technologies certainly transcend this a little bit because of their ability to reach out and get a message to the people who you need to get the message to when something actually does happen. And but like I said, it comes down to having a safe plan and a safe approach to what you do, and think of these things as sort of enhancements to that, and adding a little bit of technology. I have some stuff here. I'm going to share some screens. I really just have web pages to show you guys, but in general, radio communications is kind of what we're talking about, and it involves a spectrum all the way from very low frequency to very high frequency. When you hear people talk about 4G, 3G, 5G, this kind of stuff, they're talking about high frequency. When people are communicating from submarines and spies sending Morse code signals, you're talking about low frequencies. All of this is a bit confusing to talk about because when people invented radio, they started talking about high frequencies, and now that has become very low frequencies. So HF radio, which ham users use to talk around the world, is actually low frequency. And things like VHF radios, which are what our marine radios are, very, very high frequency, or UHF radios, ultra high frequency, are actually kind of in the middle of the spectrum today. So think of that as sort of a sliding scale. And they've kind of abandoned that HF acronym for things like the 3G technology, microwave energy. In general, low frequencies travel, it's a lot like sonar. Low frequencies travel very far, but they carry relatively little information. High frequencies are very limited to line of sight, and they're easily blocked by obstacles, but they can carry kind of a high data payload. So VHF radios that we use for marine communications, and it's kind of a simple example of one right there. You're all familiar with that. Are really good at carrying things like voice communications, and you can clearly hear somebody's voice and even the inflection in their voice when you're communicating through it. And you can have a bunch of frequencies that are all sort of in the same bandwidth that you can select without interfering with one another. Low frequency communications, at some point below about 4 megahertz, voice becomes very garbled, and at some point you can't carry voice information at all. So things like Morse code or radio telegraph and different types of simple digital communications are the only way you can communicate at those very low frequencies. To communicate the kind of bandwidth that our cell phones will, being able to load large amounts of data, require those real very, very high frequencies to do that. The limitation of VHF and UHF is line of sight. So ultimately, and in the Northwest, we see a lot of this, where being in a sound, you might be just on the other side of a fjord from somebody that you're boating with and not be able to communicate to them very well because of the fact that there's an obstacle in the way, and in VHF is line of sight. Typically, another thing that kayakers are going to run into is that your antenna, even held at arm's length above your head, really maybe is only a meter off the water. Line of sight to the horizon is maybe 20 miles, 25 miles in very calm seas. In choppier conditions, you might get a lot less than that. At best, somebody can pick you up from that far away. And that's where satellites become really handy, because satellites are overhead, and obviously line of sight's a lot less of a limitation for them. So we're lucky in the United States in that we have probably the best group of people out there watching for us and taking care of us when we're on the water, the U.S. Coast Guard. And they have satellites, and they have airplanes, and they have amazing radios and ships, and very well-trained people that spend all of their time making sure that we're safe, and we can do the things that we do recreationally or commercially. And so that's really kind of the resource that a lot of this falls back on, is those individuals. But when you're communicating using VHF, like our tuna fishermen will go 100 miles offshore here in their power boats, and they're beyond what a VHF radio, even one built into a boat with a tall antenna, they can't really reach shore with that. So they're depending on either aircraft, satellites, or other boats between shore and them and talking along. Another limitation is wattage, because of the fact that a handheld radio is battery powered and has a short antenna, and most importantly, you're holding it right next to your head. You're really only limited to about 5 or 6 watts of transmitting power. And a lot of reasons, the battery is probably realistically the limitation, but the radiation is a bit of a concern too. All of these things are emitting EMF, which is not medically understood to a great extent, but people have been doing this for a long time. That doesn't seem to be any long-term consequence from using these kind of handheld radios. But that also gives you a kind of a power limitation. Line of sight's more important. A radio this size and power with the right antenna can talk to the International Space Station if they were using these frequencies, which they're not. But for what we're doing, 5 watts, realistically 7.5 miles from a VHF handheld in a kayak would probably be kind of what I would call the maximum realistic range you'll get with a. You can legally transmit up to 25 watts. You need a car battery and a built-in radio and a big antenna. Some kayak fishermen actually equip kayaks to do that, and they use that for their stuff. For touring kayaks, that's a lot of electricity and a lot of equipment and a lot of things you don't really want to be carrying. So for most people, most kayakers, they're looking at different types of handheld radios. Some of the ones that I recommend are the standard Horizon HX300. Part of the reasons for kayakers in particular, it's lightweight, it's a float and flash. Almost all of the VHF radios today are waterproof. It's kind of actually hard to find one that's not waterproof. They have lithium-ion battery technology. Really, that's what's changed VHF radios the most in the past 15 to 20 years, is the cell phone technology that migrated over, and then these really small, high-capacity batteries that we enjoy. This particular one is USB charging, which is really cool for kayak touring, because you can use these little battery backup devices that a lot of us have, and you can buy at gas stations or REI or whatever, and you can recharge one of these many times using a little battery backup. Typically, a radio like this, if you just use it to listen, you might get 20 to maybe 30 hours of listening time with the audio fairly low. If you are transmitting, that time frame goes down. If you're using scanning features, if you're using backlight, if you're using some of the multi-channel monitoring features, then your time that you get to use it's going to go down. The transmitting at 5 watts, if you just transmitted consistently at 5 watts, you'd probably get a couple hours out of a radio. Typically in an emergency call, you wouldn't spend more than maybe 5 minutes of actual transmit time. The way an emergency call goes down with the Coast Guard or another vessel, it almost always begins on channel 16. And channel 16 is the one to know. And if you take people on the water with you that don't know about radios, that's one super important thing to impart with them early on, is that channel 16 is the channel to use. If you're using channel 72 as a popular chat, conversational, you'll hear fishermen talking about where the fish are or where the fish aren't. You'll hear kayakers talking about where they are, and sailors talking about the race that they're in. Those channels aren't really good for safety concerns. Channel 16 is the one you want to use. The Coast Guard monitors channel 16. Anybody that has a radio with the ability to keep it going for a long period of time is expected to monitor it, including a kayaker with the handheld. because a lot of times we are the rescue party, or we're the liaison to rescue. So it's important that you monitor your radio on channel 16 as well. If an emergency situation happens, like kayakers are in a place and another boat is coming, they're worried about a collision or whatever, channel 16 is the one that they would use to try to raise a communication. You can raise a communication between yourself and another recreational boater on channel 16. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's an expected norm. The norm is also expected that you would, once the conversation is established, once the connection's established, you would move to another channel to talk about your basic business. If you were talking to the Coast Guard, what the Coast Guard will do, because you want to keep channel 16 open for the next emergency or the next contact, is they're going to want you to move to one of their proprietary channels. There are 22 Alpha and Bravo, and 23 are the channels the Coast Guard uses. If the Coast Guard establishes communication with you, they'll generally take you to 22 Alpha. And then if you're working with them in communications, you're allowed to use that channel while you're talking to them. If you were to forget and turn on your radio and start talking on 22 Alpha in our area, the Coast Guard would come on, and they sound like they're standing in the room right next to you because they have great radios. And they'll tell you, this is not what this channel is for. Can you please relocate your communications to another channel? It's not uncommon for other boats to be involved in a rescue, and channel 16 is acceptable communication for any rescue. If somebody creates a mayday or a pon-pon, which are the two levels of emergency that are discussed on a radio, pon-pon is an emergency, but not of a life-threatening status, and mayday is the assumption that loss of life is an imminent possibility. Those will be broadcast on channel 16. If the Coast Guard knows, if somebody is standing on the rocks at a beach and in their binoculars, they see a person struggling in the water and they call the Coast Guard will announce a mayday on channel 16 when they're going about their business. If a EPIRB, which is a device that sends a radio signal to satellites, an emergency locator beacon, if that's activated, the Coast Guard will announce a pon-pon on channel 16 as well. So it's important that everybody monitors channel 16, and it's important that you kind of begin any communication you have on channel 16.
Hey, Derek,
in general,
sorry to interrupt you. There's a question wondering what alpha means, if you could explain that.
Alpha is A. So just the letter A is being used there to, hang on a second, my battery is not plugged in here. I have to plug that into my computer. Alpha, Bravo, there's what they call the uniform lettering code. So it's 22A, 22B. If you look at those stations written, they'll be 22A, but they call it 22 Alpha in general. Let me plug my computer in real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'm going to read another question to you if you can still hear me.
Of course.
Peter was out snowshoeing today and is wondering if the kayak personal locator beacon is specific to just kayaking, or could you take that with you in a case of a snow avalanche and have some assistance that way?
Yeah, that is a great question. So PLBs, fortunately, are good anywhere. And what will happen is, so personal locator beacon, let me go ahead and jump over to that because I've talked about VHF radios for a while there. Personal locator beacon used to be called an EPIRB, and they used to look like this. And they really weren't something practical for a kayak user to use because of the battery technology. And a lot of the reason this was this size and shape was that it had a bunch of NiCad batteries, and dating myself talking about NiCad batteries here, and this had to be this big to float. So you had a large device that either cradled off of a ship or you'd throw it when the ship was in trouble or sinking. Fortunately, with the advent of better batteries, we're looking at something like this. So they've changed the terminology. They no longer call them a PLB. They are EPIRB, which is an acronym for electronic pulse emitting radio beacon. They now call them PLB, a personal locator beacon. This is a satellite communication device. It's UHF, so it's high frequency. When I activate this, it tells a satellite. The satellite tells a ground station, and then they triage the call from there. If you're over the water, they're going to send the Coast Guard. If you're snowshoeing, they're going to send search and rescue. But ultimately, this device can only send one message. It's SOS, but somebody will come. And so they follow through with these. Absolutely. I've never heard of a case where one of these has been activated and they decided to skip that one. It just, that's not how that works. It's not uncommon for these to go off by mistake. You know, somebody gets it and they decide to try the button. That happens. Falls off a boat in a driveway is a common one, and what some of the first things they do is they'll call, and there's a number associated with a personal locator beacon. When you get one, they'll respond to it even if you don't send your information in. But the first thing you want to do when you get a PLB is to send them your information, things like your phone number, your location, what kind of boat it's going to be attached to, or if it's not attached to a boat, who it's attached to is all pertinent information. One of the first things they'll do is call the phone number attached to it and find out, is the boat sitting in the driveway, or no, my husband's out tuna fishing. Okay, so that's a very different process they've started. This emits 2 types of signals. It's a 460 UHF signal. This is a dummy, so I can kind of pretend to set it off without actually getting the Coast Guard involved. That's the antenna that I just flipped up there. This little protector, I don't know how well you can even see this, goes over the button here. If I were to push the real one there, that starts it. There's also a test button there, so you can confirm that the battery works if you don't know. At that point, it's transmitting a UHF signal that a satellite will receive, and the satellite communicates with other satellites and gets it to the people who need to initiate the rescue process. It also transmits a 121 radio beacon, so that if a helicopter or an aircraft is in a set of valleys and they're not sure exactly where your location, they can do a right left zoom in on where you are and figure out where you are just in terms of right to left. Works great for hunters, snowshoes, ski, backcountry skiing, anything where you're going to be out, and if something happens, you want somebody to be on the way. You can't tell your friends and family I'm okay. You can't tell them we're sick of the camping trip and we want to come home. This is one message and one message alone. They take it very seriously. You don't want to activate one of these if you aren't in a real situation. One of the examples that they use, this company is ACR that makes these, and they make the ones that are in 747s too. They make pretty much every personal locator beacon that's used in military aircraft and everything. One of the examples they use is actually a family in Mount Hood that went on a camping trip and it rained and they were unhappy and they activated it, and they paid for helicopters and all the things that responded to what they were doing. It's the real thing. You don't want to take it seriously, but heaven forbid you lose your paddle and you're offshore outside of land, or fall into a canyon in the snow and you break your leg. This will initiate a response. Somebody will come and find you. They will find this rather. If this isn't with you, then that doesn't help. But I have 2 of these here. These are actually both dummies, and really there's not much difference between all of these. You'll see a range of prices. This one has a little readout that tells you your latitude and longitude, which a lot of people see as a feature. I don't understand what I would do with that information. The Coast Guard has ways of finding these. They don't need to know your latitude and longitude. They can triangulate because they have multiple satellites and stations, and they know within about 100 yards of where this is, when one of these is going off. This one that I showed you, the large one, is actually a current one. It's meant to be in a cradle that's hydrostatically activated. So this is a common thing on the boat. If the boat goes underwater, this pops away and floats to the surface and goes off. These are becoming less and less common. This used to be kind of state of the art. We still sell these for commercial operators. There's a little advantage to the fact that it has an antenna, it's self-buoyant, but other than that, it does the same thing. It sends the same signal at the same wattage that all the others do. It's really kind of an antiquated technology. You'll see these less and less probably.
And Derek, there's a question if those will work in Canada and Mexico. Are those monitored kind of anywhere?
Anywhere, but understand that Canada has a great set of emergency services too. If you're in South America, some countries, what response happens might vary from place to place. We and people in the British Commonwealth and France are lucky in that if you set one of these off somewhere where there are no emergency services and they don't know or care, they're still going to look for you. They're, the American registered EPIRBs and American registered vessels frankly receive special treatment even when they're in different countries. So the timing of it, doesn't mean you're going to enjoy waiting for them to get to you, but they will track it down and they will respond to that. But it only sends one type of signal, so it has serious limitations in that there is no sending your family a message of the trip's going great and we're having a great time. They might still wonder where you are. It doesn't communicate where you are or what you're doing. It only sends that SOS to emergency services. And that actually is where very recently, we've seen a new set of technologies come along that are also satellite based, and these are based on not federally owned, but private satellite constellations. And we see all these different types of devices. And I'll some screens I'll put up that I can show you these on a proper web page. But they're satellite communicators, and they allow you to send all manner of messages of, we're having a great time, or you can send an SOS. This is a Garmin product here. Garmin recently came out with something that's newer than the demo that I have here. It can send different types of messages besides an SOS. It is a GPS device. It's not a great navigational device. So we've yet to see a great sort of iPhone of the sea where it's a VHF radio, it's an EPIRB, it's a GPS. There's nothing that does everything in one yet. And maybe that's maybe that's a good thing. It is a GPS device. You can do some limited navigation with it. It allows you to send different types of messages. This is a little bit antiquated, but they're still quite popular. It's sort of a BlackBerry satellite communicator. All these satellite communications, and I should say this too, that the EPIRBs are free. So you have paid your taxes and you have paid for the services that will respond to an emergency, whether you're the skier or the boater, et cetera. These, you're subscribing to a service. It's like a cell phone contract. It used to be kind of unapproachably expensive, like sat phones. They've made it so that you can have it for a few months and turn it off. And it's gotten kind of affordable, actually. And if you consider it a safety thing, like a digital life jacket in a way, it's really a pretty good deal. Garmin, if you're looking into getting something like this, one of the first pieces of background work you want to do is kind of look at the contracts and see how that would work out for you. It's a lot like the old days of cell contracts where they would charge you per text, they charge you per message, they charge you to turn it on and off, whether it's seasonal or year round. You don't have to get into a year-long contract to do these anymore. This one is a standalone device. It's like a BlackBerry sort of thing. You can program, it's got a QWERTY keyboard on there and send messages. It can also do simple things like ping your position every few minutes or a few hours every day, so that somebody can look at a web page and see where your progress is, whether it's your friends or your family or people concerned about you or people just curious about what you're doing. You can transfer some types of files. There's limits to how much data you can transfer through a satellite without spending a lot of money doing so. These are still popular, particularly with hunters and backcountry skiers. We still these a lot. They are kind of being replaced because in this day and age, we all own a really good screen and keyboard, and it's in our back pocket all the time. So having to buy all that technology for your new device is less popular. This tiny little gadget, and this is a really cool item, this Bluetooth connects to any smartphone device. And at that point, when your phone service isn't working, satellite service can. You can send a picture and do things like that if you have the right data plan with this. It's not very affordable yet, and it's not very practical yet. But more importantly, you can go into an app and basically send text messages. It'll go from your phone, Bluetooth, to this device, from this device to the satellite, and then to the satellite network and appear in somebody else's phone or somebody else's computer. They have a nice long battery lifespan with them. It does have just a basic kind of SOS button feature on the side. So if your leg is broken and you don't want to deal with getting out your phone, you can just activate it as an emergency SOS. It's going through what they call the Geo system, which is a little bit different of a search and rescue triage or whatnot. The same people are going to show up and rescue. It's just going to go through a different sort of process to get there. There are devices that are, and this isn't much to look at all, it's just a little black box, but it's a satellite communicator that just pings your position, and they're pretty affordable. It's really common. We sell these for people that have a boat that somebody else is moving from place to place, and they'll put this on there to make sure that they're not in Cabo having a good time or something like that. So they can track the boat and see where it is and make sure that it's moving from place to place. All of these types of satellite things require a subscription.
Derek, there's a question on the little one that you just had up that had the orange case on it. Mm-hmm. Can you say what that's called again?
This is called this is made by Garmin. So it's a company called InReach that Garmin just bought recently. And so now it's the Garmin InReach product. This is their InReach Mini that they call it. And it's kind of cool. It has like a little strap. You can hang it from your pack. They do need to be kind of directed towards, it can't be in the bottom of your skiing backpack. It's got to be kind of up near the top, but it's not uncommon to kind of hang this on the top of your backpack, or you could put it on your life jacket or something like that too. And I can actually, let me see if I can safely share screen here. Yeah, so this is the westmarine.com website here, and you'll see different items. This is, looks like $349 right now, satellite communicator. And it's good battery lifespan. You know, if you have a little battery backup, you can use your USB cables to recharge it. And this is just the westmarine.com website. These sell other places. You're going to see most of these products, Garmin, the MSRP is set, and you're not allowed to sell them cheaper. If you see somebody selling this for $179, it's not legitimate. But they're coming down a lot in price, and the main thing is the contracts have come down a lot in price. These used to be, you know, a $500 commitment for a year for something you might use once on a ski trip or a boating trip, and they've become something that's just guesstimating, you know, $60 to $80, something like that. You could cover a long vacation on the water and have the ability to send texts and, you know, happy communications, but also the ability to push that SOS button if you had to. So there are some good. Let me go back to the share real quick there. Let's see here. I had a couple others pulled up here. Now let me just type it in. The VHF, and feel free to use the site. You know, so there are some informational pages too that'll tell you about it. But it's a good assessment of kind of what technologies are out there. These are all VHF radios. This is an exception. This is the FRS GMRS radio system. These work fine on the water. The problem is the Coast Guard, and nobody's listening to that. So unless you have a plan with whoever else has the other one of these radios, you can talk to your blue in the face and never get a response. There are very small radios like this ICOM, is a little bit high priced, but that are really nice on a pack. I tend to wear my VHF when I kayak on my life jacket, so it's right there. If you're not listening to it, and if you don't have it right there, you're going to miss most of the communications. If you have it in a dry bag or stowed or in a compartment of a touring kayak, it's not really a very useful item, at least to have on while you're doing it. This one is the one that I use, or actually I use the older model of this same one. These have what's called DSC and AIS, which is a type of communication when you're transmitting audio. It's also subaudibly, so it's in the transmission, but you can't hear it. It's sending information about where you are. And let me show you the one that I use here. This is the older version of that, which is the HX890. It's kind of a brick. They've gotten smaller. That was one of the things they fixed. It has the ability to send your position when you activate the DSC. So one of the reasons that they did this, and this is a kind of covered flip up button that what that does, it turns DSC on, takes you to channel 16. They discovered there's sort of a high incidence of people having to access a radio they're not familiar with and not understanding how to use it. So, you know, dad owns the boat, he has a heart attack, and nobody else in the family can figure out how to call somebody. It was kind of the scenario. So this allowed you to turn it on, it goes to channel 16, it also shares your position. You can also, this is a really cool item for a kayak group, because you can share your position for non-emergency reasons too. So you can be in the fog, and if somebody transmits and they have their DSC on, there's a little compass rose on here, and it'll show their northwest 1.5 nautical miles, and I know kind of where they are. I like putting the radio on because it's kind of a big one on the back, and I use the kind of remote mic, and I kind of hang it over the front of my, because you miss a lot if the radio is not right by you. Even if it's on your hip, you'll hear a voice and you'll think, I thought I heard my name there, and then you pick it up. But the thing with radio, it's like old television. Once it's transmitted, it's gone. There's no getting the transmission back. You can ask for a repeat, but there's no way to hear it again, basically. So having it somewhere that's handy is key. But those are a couple of the popular ones. If you guys, anybody ever wants to come by and see these radios in my store, there's one up on Jansen Beach too. We kind of keep them out on display. Like I said, be cautious about the technology. There's a lot to buy, and a lot you can spend money on that may or may not enhance what you do while you're on the water. to be honest, there's a lot of places everywhere around here for the most part. If you have a cell phone, you're going to be able to do these same sort of things. If you were to dial 911 on the water, a very similar process to what an EPIRB does or what a channel 16 call does will be initiated. It's just a kind of a different set of people that are handling it. So that's changed things a lot. I heard some people talking about being out in the inside passage where they haven't seen anybody for days, and the cell phone's not going to do anything for you there. So, and actually VHF radio is not going to do anything for you there. Satellite communicator will. If I was doing that trip, I would have a personal locator beacon on me just for that unknown. And it's not about ability or bravery or those sort of things. Just stuff happens, and the ability to push that SOS button and make a response happen is pretty critical. So, but a lot of gadgets. There's a lot of it to own, and I know in this day and age, one of the questions I'm always asked is that, can I hook this up to my phone? And I always think to myself, why would you be out on the water and you want to get your phone out and play with that when you have a boat, you have the ocean in front of you? So it's I think it's a balance between how much of the stuff you kind of engage and what you use. And it certainly has big limitations. The assumption that a VHF radio, well, if I push that button and start talking, I'll get it. Somebody has to hear the signal too. So it's that's where the personal locator beacons are a really sound technology for that. But they can only say one thing. They can only say help. So, but I feel like you have to cut me off because I will talk all night long. So if anybody has any questions, certainly you could.
There was a question a little bit ago, and I think Kevin caught the answer, our guest from BC, but just making sure that the frequency for Canada Coast Guard is also channel 16. Is that your understanding as well?
It is. They're international, and there's relatively few places that wouldn't solicit some sort of response. There are the FCC, and there's a world governing organization that kind of tries to get everybody on the same page with radio, because one of the rules in radio is you don't want to cause harmful interference. And a great example would be if I wanted to talk to my friend that's over there on channel 16, I know they're monitoring channel 16. So logically, channel 16 is the way to hail them. But I hear people talking about some sort of another emergency, or just be other people having a conversation that started before mine. The protocol is that you don't interfere with anybody else's communication. So you have to back off and you have to try a different way around or to wait. And always monitor when you don't turn on a radio and start talking. It's one of the things, because the Coast Guard might be saving someone's life and now you're talking over their conversation. Turn it on, listen for seconds, a minute. Once it's clear, then try to establish communication. Commonwealth nations, Britain, I think everyone in North and South America, some places in Indonesia and Malaysia, there's kind of pirate communications when fishermen use frequencies that other people are trying to use for other things. And there are some countries that, and it's a really small list, it's like North Korea and Iran and these kind of places now that don't abide by any of these rules, and they will communicate where they want to communicate. They don't do a lot of communicating, but they're not playing along with the rules. But in general, channel 16 anywhere certainly if you were anywhere on the ocean, open ocean, and you were on a tanker and you saw another tanker, if you pressed channel 16 and started talking and you were in range, somebody on board, somebody at the bridge would hear you and respond. That's universal. And it's 156 megahertz is where channel 16 lives, which is in VHF. Similar to just above where like our FM, and that's FM that they're using. So, we have 103 or whatever you're listening to on your FM radio in your car. It's just, a little bit above that. So.
And there's a question here, are there any PLBs that are water activated?
There are. In general, the actual pushing of the button part of it is required, with the exception of the hydrostatically activated ones. So yes and no. It's not a great solution for a kayaker or anybody with a boat under maybe 25 feet. They live in a cradle, and let me see if I can find one on here actually. And a couple disadvantages are here, this category. This is an example here. They're expensive. This little bit right here, this kind of black thing with the yellow boxes on it, is a hydrostatic activator, that only has a 3-year lifespan. So it has to be replaced every 3 years. They're about $150. It's this entire box here that you're seeing is the device. And basically the hydrostat pops that off of there and the EPIRB floats away. It actually stays on a little string for the time being, but what it's really meant for is a commercial vessel that sinks. This pops away from the vessel. In this day and age, this would be a relatively unusual item to actually create a rescue. It would be more about recovery. So they kind of where's the wreck, because wrecks are associated with pollutants and they still want to get a vessel back. Often the insurance company wants it if something sinks. But it can be activated purely by water. The ones that the PLBs, to the best of my knowledge, there's nobody that makes one that's water activated. You're going to have to push a button or do some sort of activation. They're a little cheaper. I was on the high side there. It's 119. It looks like I'm seeing here with the for the hydrostatic activator. But they're relatively, and you notice they're calling these EPIRB, the electronic pulse emitting radio beacon, as opposed to the PLB, the personal locator beacon. I'm a big fan of this one. Can you see the cursor when I'm moving things? Yeah. This is one I'm a fan of. It's actually the same company as the ACR. They're called Ocean Signal. It's a different mark. It's a European company. So in Europe, you see Ocean Signal products. In America, you see ACR. It's the same people. They have the governing bodies, the Coast Guard, obviously in the United States. SOLAS is sort of the governing organization in Europe, and they rate the batteries longer. So you get a 5-year battery in a PLB, an ACR PLB, after which it'll still work, but it's like a pacemaker with an expired battery. You don't really want that. So you send it in and they recertify it and they put a new battery in it, and then you're good for another 5 years. These have a 7-year lifespan in them, so you get a couple extra years. It's a well-made product. These are actually small enough that I don't know if you can really tell that from the picture or not, but you can put these on a life jacket. In fact, these are meant to attach often to the inflator tube and like an inflatable life jacket. And so this is something that you can keep on you. A lot of times boaters will keep these in what they call a ditch bag, which is a big purse basically of stuff that you're going to take with you when you jump off the boat. But this can be attached to the individual or the boat. The individual's obviously but it's pocket size. That's maybe 3 inches tall and about 1 3/4 inches wide. Size of a smaller to pack of playing cards maybe. But yeah, all of these do the same thing. This one has the ability to send. This has a wrist tag kit that goes with it. This one has the location indicator on it, but similar. That's this one or this one are the ones that I would recommend if somebody's really looking at one of those. There's another item that you'll that uses just DSC. It's not as practical for a kayaker because the assumption is that there's a boat with a radio that's you're going to be able to get back on the boat you fell off of, so to speak. And as a kayaker, if you're not in the boat, you're a swimmer basically. So it's better to think of either having this equipment on yourself. That would be my personal approach. But back to what I was saying at the very beginning, all of these things are part of a plan. So think of that when you're thinking of how you'd use these things or how you would buy them, is if the unthinkable happens, how does this help me get out of that situation, or how does that work? So having falling out of your boat and surf, and you wash ashore and you don't know where the boat is, PLB is in the boat, that doesn't do you any good. So PLB on you. If it's a group of people and there's only one PLB, that falls into a different flow plan for what you're doing. You need a way to know that if something happens to someone, if Fred has, having chest pains, where is Dan to activate the PLB so that we can get emergency services here.
And Derek, there's a question on a long remote kayaking trip. Would you recommend a PLB in addition to a Garmin InReach?
The Garmin InReach would take the place of the PLB because it can send an SOS. It's doing it in a different way, but as long as you have the subscription, I've heard from some people there are some advantages because it's kind of like a private, life flight sort of situation. It's a rescue network. I think it's called, the acronym is GEOS, GEOS. But there's no harm in having both, I suppose, besides the harm to your pocketbook. But One thing I could foresee is the SOS button on the inReach, and you can see that there is a little cap that you flip up, and underneath it's the SOS button. It's a little less intuitive to teach to a group of people. So if you had other people with you, and if you were alone, I think just one of these would do both. You need the provision to charge this though, because it's not going to last for 2 weeks, whatever. So you would have to have some way of solar or battery backup to recharge it. But that would do both things. You can do just a straight SOS, or you can send a nice message about how wonderful a time you're having, both on that item. If you had to have one, probably the PLB would be the one that I would choose, because you can make watercolors and take notes, and there's other ways to record your trip.
Mm-hmm. And then a question is, the inReach device, do they work in Canada?
They do, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all of these, Canada, Mexico, the United States, they're pretty much in fact, any technology. There was an interesting conversation before we started about that, the station license, which is something that if you're going outside of the United States, you're expected to have a license to use the radio. And I should mention that with the VHF, anyone, regardless of age, can pick up a VHF, and the law reads that it is in regards to maritime operations. So you're in a boat, near a boat, you're going on a boat, you're at the chandlery buying something for the boat, you're near shore. They don't want people taking VHF marine radios into the woods to go skiing or hunting or something like that. That's not what they're for. I don't know if they catch anybody at that or how that plays out, but it's they're meant for maritime operations. But you don't need a license, and they've done a good thing with that, because if you needed that license, if you just had to fill out one form and send it in, significantly fewer people would have them. So by making the technology accessible, it's sort of like 911. That's a smart thing, that they've made it so that anyone can access this technology. The downside of that, of not having licenses, is you'll hear people swearing and saying dumb things and useless conversation once in a blue moon on VHF. And that's sort of a result of having it be such a public place. Licensing for amateur radio, station licenses. If your vessel is Coast Guard certified, which is, little boats in Oregon on a lake or something, you'll see the OR numbers. That's state registered. A bigger boat, somebody's taking overseas, will usually be Coast Guard certified vessel. They're required to have a license for their radios too, and it gives you the ability to run different types of radio communications. The main thing it's doing is giving you a call sign. If it's not open communication, they're going to want to know who you are, and they're going to want to use a name that they've picked, a call sign, basically. In general, kayaks not having state registration numbers a lot of times. I did a lot of kayaking up in Alaska when I was working as an archaeologist up there, and yellow kayak, white kayak was common that we would use talking to the other boaters or to the Coast Guard or commercial vessels, and that's fine. The description is important often, that you'll hear people with complicated play on word names for their fancy boat that they have, and the Coast Guard will call them hailing vessel or white power boat, and if they don't like your name, they'll make up a new name for you. So it's a lot of times the naming system, but most people don't name every kayak. I don't think I've ever named one of my kayaks, to tell you the truth, and maybe some people do.
And there's another question about, do you have to use your cell phone with an inReach device?
You don't. So that the inReach Mini, that requires, this can do an SOS, and I think there's the provision to do different types of pre-made messages. So you could do a grandma we're alive message and an SOS or something like that, and do those intermittently. It can also just ping your location, and that can be viewed on a website. But this is sort of meant to tether to the device, because what was happening is, people would buy a cell phone and they'd buy one of these, and you bought the screen and the keyboard and everything more than once, and it's not as cost effective. This is an example of a standalone, and these are a little antiquated, but we still sell a lot of them, and it's all standalone. So you can leave your cell phone at home and just take that. The Garmin inReach, this is probably the most popular one right now as a standalone. But what it has is it has the little keyboard where you're moving the cursor around to A, B thing. If you have to write any long messages, that's extremely tedious. So having a QWERTY keyboard on there, or having your iPhone attached to something like that's pretty handy if you're actually doing any communicating with it. This is a little tedious. This does allow you to preload messages ahead of time. So if you know there's maybe 4 or 5 messages you'll send, you could put all those in and just hit a button rather than having to type that all in. Garmin always has a good software support too. So if you when you're getting ready to go on a trip, you can load useful information to these from your PC. All their software is free that you put into your PC that allows you to communicate with the devices. This includes like their GPSs and things like that. Once you've recorded all your tracks and you've been places, you can download all that information and do cool stuff in your PC with it after the trip. So they're well supported products, and their support right now is very strong. All these companies have, time periods where they develop a good and bad reputation for their support. Garmin is extremely strong across the board, and they bought up a bunch of map making companies, and they bought InReach, which was a separate satellite company recently. So they've been kind of conglomerating. So you're seeing a nice suite of products from Garmin that are reliable, waterproof, well supported. They're a good company.
I say that up here in Canada, our friend did the Inside Passage. They took an InReach with them. That she told me that it had, if you turn most of the features off, you could get 200 hours of battery life, and by not having it, breadcrumb all the way.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I picked you up wrong. You said that the InReach, not the mini, the orange one. Did you say that was an old one? Is there a new one coming out?
There's one that's yellow and there's one that's orange. So there's two levels, and there's one I saw at a show recently that looks more like the standard. It's actually their Garmin GPS handheld, but it has the InReach capability built into it as well. So you're going to see that. I think as Garmin acquired InReach, and as they move away from their products, you're going to see them look more like the Garmin products in the future. And there should be stuff coming out in the next month or two as well. So if you're looking at getting one of those, you might almost kind of wait until the sweet season. I don't know for a fact, but this is kind of when those sort of things come out. So
yeah, I got caught out the last time. I bought my GPS radio, and within a month they brought out a new version with a cell phone interface, and so yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with electronics, is don't buy them for the trip in 2 years, because buy at the last second if they're, well, maybe not in COVID times because there's lack of availability, but the technology gets better and it gets cheaper. So that's interesting. The 200 hours, that's a really good. I hadn't heard that all. It's nice to hear.
That's what she told me. She kept it on she made a little band on her wrist, and she kept it on her wrist with a little flip open Velcro thing. And I believe it's waterproof as well. So kayaking.
Nice. Yeah. A lot of those things you don't think about, like the backlight is one of the ones that takes a ton of power to run that. So if you can turn all that stuff off and make it go to a minimal mode, and then to have battery backup too. Some of these little solar battery backup charging systems they have now are great for kayak touring. I haven't used them in that capacity, but I've seen the technology come along. That's exactly what you need. So
that's great. We don't have any other questions in the chat, but if folks have something that you want to ask, you're welcome to unmute and ask your question, or
absolutely
feel free to put it in the chat if you would rather do it that way.
I'm going to let my bulldog out of the room. He's managed to lock himself in here and he's throwing a fit. So hang on just a second there.
Yeah.
There we go. Go on. And then he didn't want to go, but he is out.
Establishing who's the boss.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something. You mentioned earlier that you didn't know what would happen if someone were to use the marine VHF radio, like on a hike or just tooling around town. It's kind of interesting. It actually is enforced, and you can rack up some pretty big penalties being in violation. But it's regulated by the Federal Communications Commission, but the people on the ground who do the enforcement, in other words, tracking down violators as such, is the Coast Guard. And they can actually be fairly rigorous about doing that. There was a person in Florida who kept using his radio, like when he was just motoring about town, shopping, whatever. And Coast Guard, you know, they triangulated on him and drove out in one of their cars, not one of their boats, but they basically busted him, and he ended up paying a $20,000 penalty.
Ooh, ouch. Yeah.
Well, and then there's another instance. It was a shore station that I forget exactly what happened, but they had the radio and they'd left it on. There was something in the room that was like communicating it and sending the signal out. And this had happened for like a few hours. And even though it was completely, you know, unintentional, accidental, whatever, they ended up paying a $6,000 fine.
Ooh, yeah.
For that instance. But I mean, you know, when you think about it, you know, channel 16 is basically a lifeline.
Right.
People can drown within minutes, you know, if someone's, you know, just chit-chatting with their girlfriend or something like that. So, you know, it does make sense that it's treated, you know, taken seriously. But, you know, just so you know, there are substantial penalties. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's you're right. And channel 16 in particular, a lot of the channel 72 and some of the chat ones or whatever, it relatively loose, but that channel 16 is a lifeline for people that need it. So you got to be really respectful of how you use it and when you use it. And I'm an amateur radio enthusiast as well. And there's a branch of amateur radio that people, they're basically, they call it Fox and Hare, but they are looking for interference. Sometimes people don't know they're making interference. Sometimes it comes from static sources. There's clandestine radio. There's all sorts of things going on, but they make a separate hobby of trying to find out where all the kind of stray things that we don't want happening are coming from. There are international misuse of that too. You can listen to like Malaysian fishermen certain nights when the propagations, again, you can hear them having an accident. You don't understand them, but you can hear it unless you know Malaysian. But it's that there's good reasons that there's ban plans, and we figured out where these things should be. And now with the allocations to data and communication stuff, this can be a 911 call on 900 megahertz, something like that, somebody's cell phone. So, but channel 16 is always regarded as particularly precious. If you, I have heard commercial fishermen lingering and talking a little bit too much about where the squid are, and a little not too much about safety, a little too long, and the Coast Guard will come on, and they've got bigger radios than we do. They sound like the voice of God, and they'll tell them off.
Yeah, the other thing too, I mean, you touched on this, and I mean, you made the point, and I'm just kind of emphasizing it just because it's one of my pet peeves. But you know, the regulations act, you know, they do say if you're out on the water and you have a radio, you have to have it on, you have to be monitoring channel 16. Right. And you know, although I think kayakers and sea kayakers in particular are amongst the most safety conscious, you know, I've just seen too many kayakers who think that the purpose of a VHF radio is so they can make a call if they get in trouble. Right. And the real purpose is so that, you know, mariners can establish a network where they're, you know, mutually supporting each other and out there to help someone in trouble. And even if you think, you know, you're in a situation where, you know, there's no one around, there's no problem or that, you know, like you said earlier, it could be someone who's way offshore. Yep. And the only way their signal is going to reach the Coast Guard is because you hear it and you relay it. So
yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And Oregon's coast is probably one of the better examples of that, because it's such a linear progression of just deeper water and harsher conditions the further you go out. And you know, tuna fishermen are usually the example I think of, but somebody can be 40 miles out and they're making an SOS call, and you might think, how can I in my little kayak 2 miles offshore really help anybody? But you might not know it using the radio, but you can be having a call where you're hearing the distress and you're also talking to the Coast Guard, but they can't talk to each other. And that's so it's that link that becomes, and I've never been involved in one, but I've heard of conversations where there's more than one party involved, and they're, you know, bucket brigade of information ashore and back and forth. And usually with when something like that happens, they have Lear jets that they use, that they get in the air, and once that's the case, then they can hear better once they're up in the air. But it's important to listen to it. And we've had, I did a lot of charter work and talk kayaking for a long time. And if you spend a lot of time on the water, you end up involved in situations where you help other people. And it's one of the better, cooler parts about being out there in some ways, that you can be in the right place at the right time and really make a big difference. So it's something and you're absolutely right. I think that I try to impart that when I sell these things to people, is that they're thinking of me, this will save me, but we're all out there, and it's a shared process that you can be the Coast Guard one day. And I've been in on boats where the Coast Guard says, do this. And you think, well, no, it's not their job. I'm the person that's there, because being a few miles closer can be the huge difference when it comes to rescue. So.
It's true. And a lot of times when there's a distress, a boat in distress, I mean, the first thing the Coast Guard will do is send out, a message if anyone's in the vicinity.
Oh, yeah.
Go help these people.
And often somebody's right there. That maybe 5 years ago, the Oregon Tuna Classic resulted in 2 capsized boats, and it was both boats that were just right there in the fog near them. It got to people literally clinging to the bottom of a overturned boat in very cold water, and that's not a good situation. So, yeah.
Derek, there's a question if you could give us an example of how we would hail the Coast Guard in an emergency. What would we say? Who we are, a known position? What's the standard?
So the 2 that are used are PON, which is PIN, Papa Alpha November, and 3 times, and Mayday. Mayday is the escalated call, and Mayday should be serious. You shouldn't Mayday. It's raining. I forgot my jacket at home, kind of thing doesn't fly. Mm-hmm. But overturned boat, person in the water, that kind of thing. Don't feel shy about using Mayday when the time comes. Mm-hmm. PON, I've lost my paddle, I've lost the motor, I'm near shore, we're getting into bigger waves. Well, actually, that's a Mayday, but something significant. We've lost steerage, we've lost, one of our members is missing and the conditions are getting really bad, or something like that. If you're doing a tour, those are all good kind of PON calls. The Coast Guard has the realization, and it's not uncommon for other emergency services. You might get Fish and Wildlife, or if you're on the Columbia, you might be talking to a sheriff or something like that. They're pretty good at figuring out where your call is supposed to be and escalating it appropriately. So, but if something is happening, certainly I wouldn't want people to feel like they should be shy about, using their indoor voice and making sure they're polite and escalating a call. That using PON or Mayday. If an EPIRB is activated, that's one of the more common ones you'll hear if you listen to channel 16, and you can listen to channel 16 anytime you want if you have your radio, and you'll hear PON. This is the United States Coast Guard, Station Tillamook. We received the activation of a 406 EPIRB in the area of such and such and such and such. Please be on the lookout for a vessel in distress, and that's typically you don't hear the Coast Guard say Mayday very often. And it's usually because if it is a Mayday, it's something they're involved in, I think is why. But if a vessel is truly in distress, and a Mayday call is something that, is, the assumption is that all resources should go there. And at that point, like he was just saying, with all vessels being emergency services in an emergency, essentially, you're drafted when these things happen. If there's a Mayday call in the area, you can't keep fishing. This is even if you have the biggest marlin in the world, you cut the line and you are on the way to that call. You are the Coast Guard. You are the rescue services. A Mayday is something that we all should take very seriously.
Great.
I had a question.
Yeah.
What is this, if you, for a Marine VHF use for a United States citizen in Canada, do you have to get a permit?
Technically, you have to have a station license if you're using it outside the United States. And
so is a ham license?
Ham license is different. Yeah, ham license is a different set of bands you can use. Ham license requires testing. The station.
Well, I mean, if you have one, does that qualify you, or do you have to get a different permit?
Yeah, well, technically, it falls under, if it's an emergency, anyone can make a call at any time, even on a ham channel, a non-licensed person on a ham, if it's truly an emergency. If it's not really an emergency, you're in dangerous waters, like Bert was saying before there. But yeah, ham license requires 3 levels of testing, and it's basically levels of radio knowledge. They're trying to teach you about radio. If you're using a VHF in the United States, you don't need a license. If you're outside the United States, you need a station license, and it's basically you registered your use with the FCC so that a foreign entity can kind of know a little bit about who you are. It's an application you fill out. It's relatively simple. You pay a fee. It's a relatively light fee, and it allows you to use your. This is a common thing for. We have a store in Anacortes, and people buying a VHF radio there. Often they're going across. They're going to go across to Canada. You do need that license to use it there. You don't need a license to possess one. So if you have a radio, you don't use it, you wouldn't need a license there. But when you clear customs, they're going to want to see that there. I think there's a process where if you are trying to clear customs and you don't, you're not deported, you're going to be asked to fill out some paperwork there. But
Great.
It's not $100 like it is for a Canadian citizen. So
yeah, you see, yeah, there's different fees. The FCC tries to make all of this affordable for us, even commercial users of truckers that use land mobile radio and stuff. They try to make radio into a resource rather than make it into a punishment. Or the FCC is certainly not paying their bills with the fees they're collecting, because they're small fees. I think ham license is $35 or something like that once, and it's a service that our tax dollars are providing to us. And really, what they're trying to do is to keep people, respecting the use of it and using certain allocations, and that we know who people are when they're talking, and that people aren't playing around with radios.
So to get that, you just go to the FCC website?
The FCC website, you can. FCC website's a little bit mind-boggling in terms of the radio, and where radio meets bureaucracy. It's a lot of big PDFs that look overwhelming. I would try, West Marine is associated with a company called Boat US, that's a towing rescue company and also an insurance company. Their website's a really good set of resources for that. There's also another type of number that kayakers don't necessarily do this often. If you have a radio like my handheld that I showed with the microphone on it, it's called an MMSI, and it's a maritime, I forget what the acronym, but it's a 13-digit number that prescribes to you, and it allows users to know. AIS and DSC, that type of communication, is also national security issue as well. So if you go to sites like Vessel Tracker, you can go to a website that shows where all the ships are along our coast, and you can see any commercial ships required to transmit their location and information about what they're doing. And part of that's safety, and part of it's national security. If you are a fisherman and you leave Alaska and you go off towards Russian waters, and then you come back and you have your AIS on the whole time, they're probably not going to visit you. If you disappear off into Russian waters or Mexican waters, and you turn your AIS off and you're gone for a period of time and come creeping back into American waters with your AIS off, you're probably going to get a visit, because they're going to want to know what's going on.
Okay, thanks.
AIS is kind of uncommon for a kayak. It requires a fair amount of power to transmit. It's like having a radio on all the time. So you would need a pretty big source of, if you were one of these people that was rowing or kayaking across an ocean or something like that, AIS would make a lot of sense. But for the average user, it's not really. Yeah. But yeah, good question for sure.
All right, I think we're at time, and there's one question in here that for those that have had their appetite whetted by the idea of having all these gadgets, does West Marine offer a discount for OOPS members?
We've never done a promotion like that. That's not necessarily out of the question, but I can give you the lowdowns. There's a lot of ways to work discounts at West Marine or any boating retailer. There are awesome sales that come along. They usually are kind of seasonal. You'll see them at the beginning of the year. Companies like Garmin don't let you sell stuff on sale more than a couple times a year. You have to kind of apply to do that. So if you see Cabela's do their big sale and Garmin, radios are cheaper, that's something that they've applied for. If you go on to eBay and somebody seems to be selling a Garmin radio that's new and it's radically different than the MSRP, it's probably something else going on there. It might be used or something like that, or it might not be legit. But those sales do happen. Almost every company will match a price. So if you see Cabela's sell something and we happen to not have that sale, we'll match it if you come in. If you see something on Amazon, so West Marine will match Amazon prices, and anybody within 50 miles locally. Another good one to watch is Walmart on this kind of stuff. They are surprisingly affordable. But in general, you'll see kind of a minimum, not ceiling, I guess, but floor for pricing on Garmin and in reach of these different products. West Marine does a membership where you get rewards. If you buy enough stuff, you get cash back. That's a way to do that. I wouldn't buy any safety electronics as used or refurbished things personally. That's not really a thing, but yeah, price it around a little bit. If you think you see a better deal, always in our store or any West Marine, and I don't think Cabela's or Fisherman's or any of the other managers have a problem with me saying this. Always ask, if you got a question, if you think there's something going on there. But we've never done like a standard promotional kind of discount. That's something we can consider doing in the future. We usually, as the talks I've done before, I usually see kind of over a period of time, people come in and look at radios. Definitely, I'm sorry, I've sold quite a few to OOPS members. Definitely tell me if you're in. We had a member come in today actually to buy cleaning products, but we did see one of your members. Let me know that you're kayak specific and you're interested in this kind of stuff, because it's different than the stuff that we're selling to fishermen and sailors and that sort of stuff too. But yeah, price sensibly. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, that don't buy your electronics for your trip in 2005 now or 2025 now. Wait until we get closer to that time period, because this stuff always gets a little bit cheaper. There are rewards. Most of the Garmin also, and a lot of these electronics companies, in fact, all of them are stingy about if you see a coupon for 15% off at West Marine, that's not Garmin. They don't let us do that kind of stuff. But definitely look for price matches is a really good way to work discounts. And I think we're kind of lucky that we live in a time period where all this stuff has come under. I remember buying an EPIRB for a commercial boat I worked on that was $3,800. So to see these things for $300, feels pretty good. I think we're lucky to be in this time period. But at the same time, to be honest, don't stock up on a couple $1,000s worth of electronics for your kayak. Spend the money on travel, spend the money on chocolate and firewood. Sounds like it's a better investment.
Good advice.
Milk and dark. Full.
Milk and dark, yes. And one more question, which store are you located at?
I'm at the one in Tigard, so we're kind of by Lake Oswego. We're on Sequoia Parkway, which is kind of by the Office Depot and the Home Depot there. There's one on Jansen Beach too. It's a bigger store. They have more stuff. Ours is certainly easier to get to, and it's kind of convenient if you're kind of South Portland area. I live in St. John, so I'm kind of halfway in between. It doesn't matter a great deal with me. And I've worked at both stores. We have 14 in the Northwest, from Tigard to Spokane to Alaska, and a lot of them up in the Seattle area. Our stores are unique in that there's no tax here. So we see a lot of people in Seattle come down to buy this kind of stuff because you're escaping the 10% or whatever it is they're tacking on to the Seattle stores. Seattle and Portland are both flagship stores. If you want to see a lot of stuff and kind of do the fun tour, we see a lot of Canadians come through, and they'll hit the stores up and down the 5 corridors they go, and a lot of Californians and Washingtonians come and buy stuff at Tigard and Portland because of the tax break. But we're also a online retailer. You can look at our website and order all this stuff. And there are a lot of good sources. There's a lot of other good companies in town. The marine electronics were probably, maybe us and Cabela's are probably the strongest locally. It is a specialized niche market. You don't see this kind of stuff at Best Buy. I think Best Buy is still around. Yeah, Best Buy or these different retailers. REI is going to have some of the similar stuff too. Look at the big companies that have been around for a long time with this. You've seen some companies come and go from the GPS markets, and and feel free. My first name's Derek. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call, or and about use too. If you have something you already have and you're wondering if we're happy to counsel you on that sort of stuff. So people who work at West Marine have a passion where we're not necessarily in it for the money. We're boaters, and this is what we like to do. So it's to be able to kind of share that experience. The person who came and visited my store today had a bunch of pictures, and I was really impressed by. I kayaked in Monterey Bay a lot when I did tours, and it's proper ocean kayaking there. And I did a lot of tours of kids and things like that. They were relatively calm, but kayaking around here to me has always been kind of, it's in the river, it's in the lake. And I was really impressed to see pictures of ocean kayaks out in the ocean. I was like, that's the cool kayaking to me. So I'm happy to see you guys are doing what you're doing, and that having some adventures and getting out there to some of these beautiful locations. The Northwest is certainly a huge resource for that. So.
Well, thank you so much. There's a lot of thank yous and kudos on the presentation, and a lot of appreciation coming in there. So we appreciate that.
Anytime,
Yeah, and I'm going to stop the recording and people will trickle out, but I'll stick around if folks have questions or want to ask anything else. But I'm going to go ahead and officially end it so folks can
Cool.
see to wherever they're going. Thanks again, Derek.
Yeah, anytime.